the death of Thelma Todd,
Oh, yeah?
almost a century later, and we're still trying to unravel the truth behind this Hollywood mystery.
Right.
You've sent over quite a collection of material on the case,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to admit, just skimming it gave me chills.
Oh, wow.
There's something about a glamorous life cut short that always piques our curiosity.
It's the contrast, isn't it? The bright lights, the laughter, and then suddenly darkness. Thelma Todd was a comedic star in the 1920s and 30s, the ice cream blonde she was called. Worked with the Marx Brothers, Laurel and Hardy, the biggest names in comedy. And yet her life ended tragically, leaving behind more questions than answers.
And we have some fascinating sources to try and piece together those answers. I'm particularly interested in these excerpts from a French documentary you've included. It seems like they offer a fresh perspective on the case.
They do. They delve into the social dynamics of Hollywood at that time, the influence of organized crime, and the complexities of Thelma's personal relationships, all elements that might have played a role in her untimely demise.
Okay, so let's set the stage. For those of you who might not be familiar with Thelma Todd, can you give us a quick rundown of her journey to Hollywood stardom?
Thelma's story is a classic tale of ambition and reinvention. She was a small-town girl from Massachusetts who set her sights on something bigger.
Mm,
Winning the Miss Massachusetts beauty pageant was just the first step. She quickly moved to Hollywood, determined to make her mark.
right.
And she did
Right.
captivating audiences with her comedic timing and her undeniable charm.
But she wasn't content with being just a pretty face or the funny girl.
Right.
She had aspirations beyond slapstick comedy, right?
Absolutely. She wanted to explore more dramatic roles to prove her versatility as an actress. This desire led her to collaborate with director Roland West, a man who had become a major figure in her life both professionally and romantically.
And their relationship wasn't exactly smooth sailing. From what I've read, there was a lot of drama surrounding Roland West.
Their partnership was a whirlwind of passion, ambition, and ultimately tragedy. They opened a restaurant together, Thelma Todd's Sidewalk Cafe, which became a popular hangout for the Hollywood elite. But behind the scenes, their relationship was marked by turbulence and possessiveness on Roland's part.
And as if that wasn't enough, Thelma also had a rather tumultuous marriage to Pat DeSico, a man with some serious underworld connections.
Her marriage to DeSico was short-lived but intense, marked by both passionate highs and violent lows.
Oh, wow.
He was deeply embedded in the mob with ties to Lucky Luciano himself.
Right?
This connection to organized crime would later become a focal point of the investigation into Thelma's death.
It's like a real-life film noir, isn't it?
Yeah,
The glamorous actress, the possessive lover, the mobster ex-husband, all these elements swirling around Thelma's life.
that's a very apt comparison. And like any good film noir, the line between illusion and reality becomes blurred. Thelma's life on the surface seemed filled with success and adoration. But underneath that veneer, there were dark undercurrents, secrets, and potentially dangerous connections.
And all of these elements came to a head on the night of December 14th, 1935. Thelma was the guest of honor at a party at the legendary Trocadero nightclub. It was supposed to be a celebration, but it ended up being the prelude to a tragedy.
This party was a who's who of Hollywood's elite, a night of revelry and glamour. But amidst the celebration, Thelma had a heated confrontation with her ex-husband, Pat DeSico.
You have to wonder what they were arguing about.
Right.
Was there still lingering resentment between them? Or was it something more sinister, something related to DeSico's mob ties?
Those are the questions that investigators grappled with. The argument was witnessed by several people, confirming the animosity between them. But the exact nature of their dispute remains a mystery.
So after the party, Thelma calls Roland West, saying she'll be home soon.
Right.
Her chauffeur drops her off at her apartment above the Sidewalk Cafe, and this is where things get strange.
Thelma's behavior that night deviates from her usual routine. She insists her chauffeur doesn't walk her to the door, which was completely out of character for her. This was the last time anyone saw her alive.
2 days later, her lifeless body is found not in her apartment, but in the garage of Roland West's house, which is located up a steep hill from the restaurant.
Right.
It's a puzzling discovery, to say the least.
The location of her body is one of the first red flags that raised doubts about the official story.
Yeah.
Why was she at Roland's house so far from her own apartment, and what was she doing in the garage?
The official cause of death was carbon monoxide poisoning, ruled an accident. But you mentioned earlier that there were doubts about this conclusion. What didn't add up?
Let's start with the scene itself. Thelma was found slumped over the wheel of her car, dressed in her evening gown from the party, her hair and makeup immaculate.
Wow.
Her shoes were pristine, with no signs of damage. It's a strangely peaceful picture, at odds with the violence of carbon monoxide poisoning.
and that steep hill leading to Roland's garage. We have to consider that Thelma had an injured ankle at the time. Do we really believe she made that climb, especially in those heels?
It's highly unlikely. The police even attempted to reconstruct the scene, having a woman in similar shoes attempt the climb.
Oh, wow.
Not only did she struggle, but her shoes were scuffed and damaged.
Yeah.
This raises serious questions about the feasibility of Thelma making that journey on foot.
Okay, so let's say for a moment that she did manage to get to the garage. Why would she even be there in the first place?
The official story is that she couldn't get into her apartment and went to the garage to warm up in her car.
Okay.
But this explanation is challenged by several inconsistencies.
Such as?
Well, for starters, the autopsy revealed undigested peas in Thelma's stomach.
Oh.
Peas that weren't served at the party she attended.
Right.
This suggests she ate somewhere else after the party, contradicting the timeline of her supposedly going straight home and then to the garage.
And there were those witnesses who claimed to have seen or spoken to Thelma after she supposedly returned home.
Exactly. One friend reported receiving a phone call from Thelma the afternoon after the party, while another woman claimed to have seen Thelma in her car with an unidentified man. These accounts directly contradict the official narrative that she went straight to her apartment and then to the garage.
So we have conflicting timelines, unexplained food in her stomach, and then there's the issue of the high blood alcohol content found in her system.
That's another crucial point. Despite reports that she barely drank at the party, the autopsy revealed a significant amount of alcohol in her system. This raises the question, where and when did she consume that alcohol? And who was she with?
It's like trying to assemble a puzzle where the pieces just don't quite fit together.
Right.
There are gaps, inconsistencies, and unanswered questions that cast a shadow of doubt over the accidental death ruling.
And that's precisely why so many people believe that there's more to this story than meets the eye.
Really?
That Thelma Todd's death wasn't a tragic accident, but something far more sinister. If we move away from the idea of an accident, then we need to look at who might have wanted Thelma Todd dead. And as you've hinted at, there's no shortage of potential suspects.
Let's start with the person who arguably had the most to gain from Thelma's death, her business partner and lover, Roland West. You mentioned earlier that he was controlling, even possessive.
Right.
Was he capable of something more sinister?
Roland West is a complex figure, a talented director, but also a man who craved control. We know he locked Thelma out of their shared apartment on multiple occasions.
Yeah.
Could those acts of control have escalated to something far more dangerous?
And his behavior after Thelma's death was suspicious, to say the least. He gave contradictory statements to the police, downplayed their relationship, and seemed more concerned with protecting his reputation than with finding the truth.
His actions certainly raise red flags, and then there's that alleged deathbed confession where he admitted partial responsibility for Thelma's death,
Oh, right.
claiming he had locked her out that night to teach her a lesson.
That's a pretty damning statement. Even if he didn't intend to kill her, his actions may have directly led to her death. It puts him in a very different light, doesn't it?
It does. It suggests a level of culpability, even if unintentional, but we have to consider the source of that confession. Was it a genuine admission of guilt, or a way to clear his conscience before he died? Without corroborating evidence, it's hard to say for sure.
It's also worth mentioning that the Sidewalk Cafe, despite its popularity, was reportedly struggling financially. Could money have played a role in Thelma's death?
Financial motives should always be considered in a case like this. Was Roland in debt? Did he stand to benefit financially from Thelma's life insurance policy? These are questions that investigators would have explored.
It adds another layer to their relationship, doesn't it? The line between love, business, and desperation can become very blurry.
Absolutely. And when those lines blur, it can create a breeding ground for resentment, jealousy, and even violence.
Okay, so we have Roland West, the controlling lover, with a possible financial motive and a questionable confession. But he wasn't the only man in Thelma's life with a potential reason to want her gone.
Let's shift our focus to her ex-husband, Pat Gasico, a man with a volatile temper and deep ties to organized crime. Their relationship was toxic, marked by violence and control.
And their public argument at the Trocadero just days before her death suggests that the animosity between them hadn't faded.
It certainly points to lingering tension, but was it enough to drive DeSico to murder? We need to consider his connections to the mob. Was Thelma somehow involved in their dealings? Did she refuse to cooperate with them? Could her death have been a way to silence her or send a message to others?
That's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
And it ties into those rumors that Lucky Luciano himself was interested in turning Thelma's Sidewalk Cafe into a mob-run casino.
Luciano was ambitious, ruthless, and constantly seeking opportunities to expand his empire. He saw the potential in a high-profile establishment like the Sidewalk Cafe. It would have given him a foothold in Hollywood, access to celebrities, and a steady stream of revenue.
And if Thelma refused to cooperate, knowing Luciano's reputation, that would have been a risky move.
Defying someone like Luciano was not without consequences. It could have been seen as a challenge to his authority, an act of disrespect that demanded retribution.
And you mentioned earlier that after Thelma's death, Luciano abruptly left Los Angeles and never returned, almost as if he was escaping the heat.
His sudden departure certainly raises questions. Was he fleeing the scene of a crime, or was it simply a coincidence? We have to weigh the plausibility of Luciano orchestrating a high-profile murder like this. It doesn't quite fit with his usual modus operandi. He preferred to operate in the shadows, using discreet methods to eliminate rivals and maintain control.
So while we can't rule out Luciano's involvement entirely, it seems less likely than perhaps someone with a more direct connection to Thelma.
That brings us back to the people in her inner circle, those who had the most to gain or lose from her life or her death.
And we can't forget about Jewel Carmen, Roland West's estranged wife. Even though they were separated, she still lived on the property where Thelma was found.
Jewel is often overlooked as a suspect, but her potential motives can't be ignored. She had reason to be jealous of Thelma's relationship with Roland.
And there was a financial element to consider as well. As Roland's legal wife, she stood to inherit a portion of his assets, which would have increased if Thelma was out of the picture.
The fact that Thelma's body was found in Jewel's garage adds another layer of intrigue. Was it a calculated act to frame her, or a desperate attempt to cover up her own involvement?
We're dealing with a tangled web of relationships, each with its own undercurrent of jealousy, resentment, and potential violence. It's hard to know who to trust or who to suspect.
That's the challenge with cases like this. We're piecing together fragments of information, trying to make sense of a tragedy that unfolded nearly a century ago. There are gaps in the narrative, conflicting accounts, and missing pieces of the puzzle.
It's like trying to solve a mystery novel where the author has deliberately left out crucial clues.
And perhaps that's what keeps us so fascinated even after all this time.
Yeah.
The desire to fill in those gaps, to find those missing pieces, and to finally uncover the truth behind Thelma Todd's mysterious death.
It's amazing to think that we're still talking about this case almost a century later. Thelma Todd's story, this unsolved mystery, continues to capture our imagination. Why do you think that is?
There are a few elements at play here, I think. The
Yeah.
glamour of old Hollywood always has a certain allure, that peek behind the curtain at a world of fame and fortune.
Right.
And when that world collides with tragedy,
Mhm.
especially a tragedy shrouded in mystery, it creates a powerful and enduring narrative.
And then there's Thelma herself. She was a talented, ambitious woman who defied the expectations of her time. She wasn't content with just being a pretty face. She wanted more, and she wasn't afraid to go after it.
Her spirit resonates with people even today. She was a trailblazer in many ways, and her untimely death,
Right.
it feels like a loss of potential, a story cut tragically short.
And we haven't even touched on the official report's mention of suicidal tendencies. There was that, evidence of Thelma's upbeat demeanor and plans for the future.
That discrepancy further muddies the waters. If she was truly contemplating suicide, why was she making plans, buying Christmas presents, and signing new contracts? It doesn't quite add up.
It feels like every time we uncover one piece of the puzzle, another one appears, making the picture even more complex.
That's the nature of cold cases, especially those from this era.
Yeah.
We're reliant on fragmented evidence, witness accounts that may be unreliable, and a historical context that's often difficult to fully grasp.
So, after examining all of this information, the conflicting accounts, the potential motives, the unanswered questions, where do you stand on the case? Do you believe Thelma Todd's death was an accident? Or was there something more sinister at play?
I always try to approach these cases with an open mind to consider all possibilities, but it's difficult to ignore the sheer volume of inconsistencies in Thelma's case. The location of her body, the conflicting timelines, the unexplained food in her stomach, the high blood alcohol content, these are not easily dismissed as mere coincidences.
And then there are the suspects themselves, each one with their own secrets, their own potential motives, and their own connections to a world where violence was often used to solve problems.
Roland West, the possessive lover with a questionable confession. Pat DeSico, the volatile ex-husband with mob ties. Lucky Luciano, the ruthless crime boss with a desire to expand his empire. And even Jewel Carmen, the seemingly forgotten wife lurking in the shadows.
It's like a game of Clue, but with much higher stakes.
Right.
And the truth, like the murderer in that game, remains elusive.
But that doesn't mean we should stop searching for answers. Every piece of information, every new perspective, it brings us closer to understanding what really happened to Thelma Todd.
Yeah.
And perhaps one day that truth will be revealed.
We've covered a lot of ground in our deep dive into this case, and I have to admit I'm no closer to a definitive answer than when we started. But I think that's okay.
Right.
Sometimes the journey is just as important as the destination.
Absolutely. The process of examining the evidence, weighing the possibilities, and challenging the accepted narrative, that's where the true value lies. It's about engaging with history, questioning assumptions, and recognizing that the past is rarely as simple as it seems.
And for you listening, this is where your own investigation begins. We've presented the facts, explored the various theories, and examined the potential motives of the key suspects. Now it's your turn to play detective.
Consider the evidence we've discussed. Weigh the plausibility of each scenario. Who do you believe was responsible for Thelma Todd's death? And, most importantly, why? There's no right or wrong answer here. It's about forming your own conclusions based on the information you have.
Thelma Todd's story is a reminder that even in the glamorous world of Hollywood, darkness can lurk beneath the surface.
Right.
Her case, with all its twists and turns, its unanswered questions and lingering doubts, it serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that fame and fortune don't always guarantee a happy ending.
And it's a testament to the enduring power of mystery. Nearly a century later, Thelma Todd's death continues to fascinate us, challenging us to unravel the threads of a past that refuses to stay buried. It's a puzzle that may never be fully solved, but the search for answers is what keeps the story alive.
So keep those detective hats on, keep asking questions, keep digging for the truth. Thelma Todd and all those whose lives ended too soon under mysterious circumstances, they deserve nothing less.